Every civilization that has ever existed has had an answer to this question. The Egyptians built pyramids around it. The Greeks argued about it philosophically for centuries. Every major religion on Earth has staked part of its authority on claiming to know. And today, neuroscientists and cardiologists are running actual peer-reviewed experiments on it. The question hasn't changed. What has changed is how many angles we now have on it. And the honest answer, from science and philosophy both, is more unsettling than most people expect. This isn't a video that tells you what to believe. It's about what we actually know, what millions of people have experienced, and why this question is harder to close than it looks. For most of human history, death had a clear definition. Your heart stopped, you stopped breathing, and that was the end. The line was obvious. Modern medicine has made that line almost unrecognizable. Clinically, death is now defined as the irreversible cessation of all brain function, including the brainstem, which controls breathing and heartbeat. But irreversible is a word that keeps having to be updated. People declared dead by one decade's standards are routinely resuscitated by the next. Doctors now draw a distinction between clinical death, when the heart stops, and biological death, when cells begin dying at the tissue level, a process that can take hours. In between those 2 points is a window that researchers have only recently begun to study seriously. That window is where most of the interesting questions live. In the minutes after the heart stops, something unexpected happens inside the brain. In 2023, researchers at the University of Michigan recorded brain activity in dying cardiac patients and found surges of gamma wave activity, the same high-frequency waves associated with dreaming and conscious perception, firing after clinical death. Not a flatline, a surge. Similar findings had been recorded in dying rats in 2013. The 2023 study was the first to document it in humans. What it means is genuinely contested. It could be random electrical noise, neurons misfiring as the system loses power, the way a light flickers before it goes out. It could be the biological signature of a last burst of consciousness. Nobody knows. What the data makes clear is that the dying brain is not simply switching off. Something is happening in there. The argument is about what? Tens of millions of people alive today report having had a near-death experience, a period of awareness during clinical death they can recall in detail afterward. The accounts share a striking consistency across cultures, religions, and centuries, a sensation of leaving the body, moving through a tunnel, encountering an overwhelming light, feeling profound peace, sometimes seeing deceased relatives, sometimes simply knowing it wasn't time yet. For a long time, mainstream medicine dismissed these as hallucination, oxygen deprivation, or psychological projection. Those explanations still exist. They've also run into a specific problem: accuracy. Some patients who report near-death experiences also report observing verifiable details, conversations in the hallway, equipment in the room, events that occurred while they were clinically unconscious, that are later confirmed by medical staff. The most documented case is Pam Reynolds, a musician whose brain was surgically and deliberately stopped in 1991. She later described the specific instruments used on her and a song that was playing in the operating room. The surgical team confirmed both. These cases haven't been explained away. They've been disputed, examined, and debated in peer-reviewed literature for decades. The anomaly remains. Across every era and every continent, humans have refused to accept that death is simply the end. What's remarkable is not the diversity of what they believe, it's how much they agree. The concept of a soul, some non-physical aspect of a person that persists after the body stops, appears in ancient Egypt, Vedic India, pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, ancient Greece, and sub-Saharan Africa. These cultures had no contact with each other. They arrived at the same conclusion independently. Almost every tradition also shares the idea that how you live determines what follows. Karma in Hindu and Buddhist thought, divine judgment in Abrahamic traditions, the weighing of the heart against a feather in ancient Egypt. Different systems, same underlying logic. What you do here matters somewhere else. Whether this convergence reflects a universal human intuition pointing at something real, or simply a universal human inability to accept that death is final, is a question neither science nor philosophy has settled. It would be dishonest to skip the strongest counter-argument. When the brain stops, everything stops, and there is nothing after death. This is not a failure of imagination. It is a serious position backed by significant evidence. Every mental state we have ever studied, every memory, personality trait, emotion, and sense of self has been shown to be alterable by physical changes to the brain. Damage a specific region and you lose specific functions. Change the brain chemistry and you change the person. If the mind were truly independent of the brain, you would not expect this level of physical dependence. The fact that the brain so completely dictates inner experience is, for many scientists, scientists and philosophers the clearest evidence that there is nothing beyond it. The near-death experience, in this view, is simply what a shutting-down brain feels like from the inside, vivid, meaningful, and entirely produced by dying tissue. The consistency across cultures doesn't point to a shared reality. It points to a shared neurology producing similar experiences under similar conditions. This may be correct. It deserves to be stated plainly and not papered over. Here is where things get genuinely strange, and where even some physicists are willing to entertain uncomfortable ideas. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. The energy that constitutes a living human being does not vanish at death. It disperses, changes form, re-enters other systems. Nothing that makes up a person is ever technically destroyed. That is not the same as consciousness surviving death. Physicists are careful to say so, but a small number of serious physicists, not fringe figures, have proposed frameworks in which consciousness is not simply a byproduct of brain activity, but something more fundamental to the universe. Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff proposed a model called orchestrated objective reduction, which suggests consciousness arises from quantum processes inside the brain's microtubules and may interact with the fabric of space-time itself. If consciousness has a quantum basis, it may not be strictly local to or bound by the brain. Most physicists regard this as speculative. It is speculative. It is also not obviously wrong, and the scientists dismissing it have not yet produced a competing explanation for what consciousness actually is, where it comes from, or why physical matter produces subjective experience at all. That last question, why there is something it feels like to be alive, remains one of the deepest unsolved problems in all of science. In recent decades, a new category of testimony has emerged that is difficult to file away neatly. People resuscitated after prolonged cardiac arrest, sometimes after being clinically dead for 30 minutes or more, who came back with detailed accounts of what they experienced and who were changed permanently by it. Studies tracking these patients over time have found consistent patterns: reduced fear of death, increased empathy, a shifted sense of what matters. People who had been materialistic describe losing interest in money. People who had been emotionally closed describe becoming open. These are not small or temporary changes. Researchers who have followed these patients for years describe them as among the most psychologically stable people they have ever studied. That is a strange outcome if the experience was simply a hallucination produced by a malfunctioning brain. Hallucinations don't typically produce lasting personality restructuring in a consistent direction across thousands of unrelated people. Whatever the experience is, it does something to people that persists long after the crisis is over. What it does to our understanding of death is still being worked out. There is a problem sitting at the center of all of this that doesn't get talked about enough. Science has not yet explained consciousness itself. We know which regions of the brain are active during certain experiences. We know that damage to specific areas produces specific losses. We can map neural correlates of awareness with increasing precision. What we cannot do, what no theory has yet managed, is explain why any of this produces subjective experience at all. Why does a pattern of electrical signals feel like something from the inside? Why is there a you experiencing your life rather than just a brain processing information in the dark? Philosophers call this the hard problem of consciousness. It has remained unsolved for decades, not because researchers aren't trying, but because every time science explains the mechanism, it still hasn't explained the experience. And until we understand what consciousness is, we are not equipped to say with any confidence what happens to it. We are trying to track something we haven't defined. One category of evidence rarely makes it into the mainstream conversation: the accounts of people in the final days and hours of natural death. Not sudden cardiac arrest, but the slow approach of the end. Hospice nurses and palliative care doctors, people who sit with the dying more than almost anyone, report a remarkably consistent phenomenon. In the days before death, patients who have been unconscious or unresponsive will sometimes suddenly become lucid, recognizing family members, holding coherent conversations, expressing peace, before fading again and dying within hours. Researchers call this terminal lucidity. It has been documented in patients with advanced Alzheimer's, with brain tumors, with conditions that had long since destroyed the neural architecture we assume is necessary for clear thought. Nobody has a clean explanation for it. A brain that has been structurally compromised for years should not, by any existing model, suddenly produce clarity. And yet it does. Consistently enough that hospice workers have come to expect it, and consistently enough that it has begun attracting serious scientific attention. It is one more data point that sits outside the boundaries of what the current model can comfortably hold. Here is where we actually are. The dying brain does not simply switch off. We have data on that now. Tens of millions of people report consistent experiences during clinical death. A small number of those cases involve verified perceptions that no existing model cleanly explains. Every civilization in human history, working independently, concluded that something persists. And we still do not have a scientific consensus on what consciousness even is, which means we don't yet have the tools to answer what happens to it. None of this proves an afterlife. It also does not close the question. The confident dismissal, obviously nothing, it's just the brain shutting down, is not more supported by current evidence than the confident assertion that heaven exists and looks a specific way. Both are reaching past what the data can hold. The most defensible position is that we are asking a question we do not yet have the tools to answer. That's uncomfortable. It is also, if you sit with it, one of the stranger things about being alive. That after everything humans have built and discovered and tested, the oldest question remains genuinely open. We do not know what happens after we die. We have not stopped trying to find out. If that's the kind of question you want to keep exploring, subscribe. Every video starts here, at the edge of what we know, looking at what comes next. We'll see you there.